Hello, my name is Sydney Fox, and for my research proposal, my intent was to determine whether state law enforcement agencies are effectively reducing incidences of human trafficking in the United States. Currently, research is lacking in the state scope of human trafficking, and it is instead focused on the national and international level. This is according to Logan, Walker, and Hunt in 2009. In an exploration of human trafficking research in 2008, De Heredia determined that there were at least more than 22 specific and individual definitions of human trafficking. To eliminate confusion, for my research proposal, I used the definition of trafficking that came from the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, or the TVPA, which defined human trafficking as A, the recruitment, harboring, transportation, supplying, or obtaining a person for labor or services through the use of fraud, force, or coercion for the purpose of involuntary servitude or slavery, or B, sex trafficking in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform sex acts is under the age of 18. Another problem with countering human trafficking is the media's sensationalized portrayal of human trafficking victims as being young, beautiful, naive victims who were tricked into trafficking. And this came from De Heredia in 2008 as well. Instead, according to De Heredia, trafficked victims are usually minorities. They come from poverty. They have experienced gender or inequality, racial inequality issues, which have led them into lives of trafficking. But many trafficking victims have at least some knowledge of what they will be going into when they go into trafficking. So they know that something that they will be doing is probably illegal, such as entering a country illegally or being in an industry that in itself is illegal, such as prostitution. So specifically, it's when victims are subjected to abuse or forced into slavery that was not part of their original agreement that it becomes human trafficking. According to Logan, Hunt, and Walker in 2009, because these people are committing illegal acts themselves, such as entering into a country illegally or being in an industry that in itself is illegal, such as prostitution, they are reluctant to notify authorities when they have become abused or something that has gone outside of the scope of the contract that they entered into with their perpetrator. They're reluctant to tell law enforcement because they know that what they're doing is illegal and they're worried about personal ramifications of that. This is further complicated because most of the time police officers do not identify the individuals as victims of human trafficking. Instead, they only see the acts that that person is committing that are illegal, such as prostitution or undocumented labor working, and that can lead to deportation. In their research of current policies, Nieuwenhuizen and Puchard in 2007 found that little interest was paid to identifying the actual perpetrators, and they found this to be true not just in the United States but also worldwide, which led them to wonder if the intent of the political agenda was actually to eliminate or prevent human trafficking or if it was merely to repress it. According to Logan, Walker, and Hunt in 2009, human trafficking can be largely profitable and is relatively low risk because the perpetrator's products, so for example humans, are largely disposable. As a result, perpetrators often use this to threaten their victims, to force them to submit to them because they know that if they threaten them with the death, that person that's the victim of trafficking knows just as well as they do that if they do die as a result of this, nothing's going to come of it. According to Miller and Wesolewski of 2010, before the TVPA of 2000 was passed, the only way that the U.S. could punish forced labor was through old slavery statutes that dated back to the 1800s. So the TVPA set a model, basically, for understanding and remediating human trafficking based on several factors, including the perpetrators, the victims, and reducing the market, so therefore reducing supply and demand for human trafficking. Unfortunately, in spite of the TVPA, there's no universal set of law enforcement policies that states can adopt or are encouraged to adopt, and there's no system of accountability that neither the states nor other countries have to abide by. Most states, according to Grubb and Bennett in 2012, have no formal training requirement for their law enforcement officers. Wilson, Walsh, and Kluber in 2006 determined that frontline officers really are ill-trained to deal with human trafficking incidences that they come upon. Their study found that while half of police officers thought that trafficking was a big issue, only 12% of them thought it was relevant to their individual local police department. This is interesting because the majority of first contacts are made between the victim and a local law enforcement officer. The same study found that 72% of officers believed that the issue of human trafficking was better left to federal officers to handle. As a result of this mindset, 96% of police departments had no formal training on human trafficking for their officers. Additionally, a staggering 98% of police departments in the U.S. had no formal written procedures for how their officers ought to handle suspected incidences of human trafficking when they come upon it. According to Farrell and Fahey in 2009, much of the research concludes that human trafficking is a multifaceted issue. It doesn't have one grand, solution to this big problem. In fact, the issue has been framed as a political, a human rights, and a national security issue by those who are involved or say that they're involved in finding a solution to this problem. I determined that the biggest issue with conducting research on human trafficking data is that there is no tracking data. The UCR, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and the FBI do not track incidences of human trafficking. This makes the study and available conclusions about human trafficking very limited. So as a result of not being able to just pull the statistics that are already there from the national crime databases, what we would have to do as far as research moving forward is to track each state individually. To do this, criminal records from each state's repository would need to be collected from before they implemented required human trafficking training until now to see if there is a difference. So I decided this after I looked at data that was collected and analyzed by the Polaris Project in 2012. I had set out to determine whether police departments that require some form of training on human trafficking made more arrests of perpetrators than those who did not require any formal training. I used a null hypothesis, which predicts that there will be no statistical significance between the training officers receive regarding human trafficking and the arrests made regarding human trafficking. So to do this, I planned to use a one-shot case study design with an independent variable and a post-test with no pre-test or control group. The independent variable in this case was any amount of required human trafficking training, and the dependent variable was arrests of perpetrators of human trafficking. I used the total number of arrests for prostitution and commercial vice and sex offenses because according to Logan, Walker, and Hunt in 2009, sex offenses including molestation, statutory rape, and other contact are often found in congruence with human trafficking. Because I didn't have even the option of doing just human trafficking, this was the best that I could do. Statistics were available for the year of 2009 for 14 states that do require human trafficking training. I compared the data for the total number of arrests for each state against the number of sex offenses for each state to see if there was a correlation between sex offense arrest rates in states that require human trafficking training and their total crime statistics. I cannot infer that this also means that there is a correlation between human trafficking training and a reduction in human trafficking arrests because that data has not been compiled. The average of the 14 states that do require human trafficking training arrest data represented 1.14% of those states' total arrest offenses were related to sex offenses. Of the data for the states that do not require human trafficking training, their arrests accounted for 0.17% of their total arrests were for sex-related crimes. There are 4 states which are determined by the Polaris Project 2012 to be the poorest performing with regard to legislation regarding human trafficking. In looking specifically at their arrest data for sex offenses, they represent 0.33% of their total arrests. This is close to a third of the arrests that were made for sex-related offenses in the states that required human trafficking training. A secondary analysis of states' data will help states and the federal government determine if the policies and laws that they have implemented have been useful and if they need to be altered so that real change can be made. Most states' repositories allow for a keyword search of a crime, so the data would need to be collected and compared against the full arrest data for each state in that given year. Some states have very new legislation on their books regarding human trafficking, and others have had human trafficking training required for a long time. So again, it would need to make sure we're not comparing apples to oranges. It would need to stay within the state scope. Once all the data has been collected and each state's progress has been accounted for, it is possible that further correlations may be found among the data on the national scale, though that cannot be determined until all of the data has been collected and thoroughly analyzed.